Silksong is a video game. I went to college. Alright, this here's my collection of video game NPCs. Listen, I'm only letting you see this because you're very special to me, okay? I don't just show this collection to anyone. Look, but don't touch. Got it? I can't have your nasty hands bending the corners on these because I want this collection to be an heirloom for my illiterate grandchildren when my body evaporates itself from this wicked dimension. One NPC on this shelf is worth more than your entire life. Do you understand me? Alright, here's Mila. This is Mila. You see, the reason she's so rare is because she dies 26 seconds into the game. She's got that Hollow Knight patented, slightly different dialogue for every single possible time you go back and talk to her sort of vibe, but right from the very first sequence of dialogue, you can already tell something isn't right. She's stuttering, she seems unhealthily concerned with the singing crystals in the region, and each tiny little step you take towards game completion so exponentially worsens her condition that it can ramp entirely out of control before you even know she exists. This creates a psychological dilemma players have taken to calling Schrodinger's Mila. Hi, Vsauce. You can save Mila by posting your current physical address in the comments. Or can you? When asked about whether it's possible to save Mila, Team Cherry famously said in a Reddit AMA that as long as Mila is not killed, there is always the chance of a happy ending. Right? I don't know, you made the fucking game. You should be telling me. This led to an unprecedented abuse of copioids within the game's fanbase, where players eventually settled on the delusion that Mila's happiest ending is a playthrough where you just pretend she doesn't exist. You just don't look at her. That part of the game isn't even finished. At least your thumb won't slip and accidentally catch a murder charge if you try to make peace post-infection, because as long as she doesn't die, it's basically the same as saving her, right? Just try posting your address in the comments. I mean, who knows? It might work. It might work. I can't even fucking hear out of my right ear right now. I'm just letting you know if the mastering on this audio sucks this video, it's not my fault. Seeing Sherma's post on the Songclave wish wall for the first time triggered within me a protective instinct most mothers today would love to have. Nothing sends a ripple of terror through your back and out your ass like the game's only optimist telling everyone he took a plunge headfirst into Brookhaven Hospital with no escape plan. But worry not, Sherma and Mila meet with vastly different fates. In fact, Sherma arguably stands to represent a completely opposite emotional theme, despite the early game leading you to believe he might just turn into another statistic. Mila represents death. It is her job to represent death. She is a window into the hopelessness of a kingdom that has been completely and irreversibly ravaged by evil, globby, moldy Sunny D. And Mila is used as a vehicle to communicate that hopelessness in a way that's had half the fan base huffing lethal amounts of copium on the imagined silver lining that there might be a way to save her from an imminent predetermined death. If you want to think about it this hard, you could even argue parts of the fan base itself, through this behavior, reinforce these very same themes the game uses Mila to demonstrate. Despair, desperate attempts to bargain with death, helplessness in the face of a truth both ugly and absolute. Sherma doesn't represent any of this. This character's raw, unflinching optimism not only doesn't get him killed somehow, but also positions him to be a shining beacon in Pharloom's darkness. This optimism is effortlessly kept through the entirety of the game's events, and though this optimism is fed by his general naivety and innocence during the first act, it's a hope that's kept strong through his motivation to help those affected by the haunting upon observing the Citadel's ugly truth in Act 2. Sherma's ability to keep this attitude, despite the peril of mid to late game events, delivers a powerful takeaway. It is easy as shit to be an optimist during optimistic times. And that's not even to say the state of Pharloom was ever optimistic. Like, we are told 5 minutes into this game that the kingdom's balls are being supernaturally speed-bagged by this mysterious, haunting curse, and attempting the pilgrimage to the Citadel of Pharloom is statistically a guaranteed death. Yet this man makes it look like a Sunday morning jog through a socio-economically fortunate neighborhood, armed with only his wicked bars and an unprecedented display of blissful ignorance. During the first act, Sherma appears along various points on Pharloom's pilgrimage route. This makes him extremely easy to run into since these locations are usually incredibly obvious, even and especially to someone beginning a first playthrough. The first time you ever see him is in the very first scene of the Marrow, right as you enter the region from Bone Bottom. So the game is really going out of its way here to make sure you notice this NPC no matter what. If Hornet interacts with Chakra above this scene, Sherma disappears from the gate indicate whether or not you've activated it, but it's kind of hard to do this by accident, since the only way directly to chakra from where you enter the marrow involves sequence breaking your way up to a platform that would normally be out of reach. This makes Sherma incredibly hard to completely miss, not including a player's decision to just not talk to him when they see him. But Sherma also has a second opportunity to appear in this area that is triggered if you return to the Bell Beast room after already having noticed the Bell Beast, but without acquiring the Silk Spear ability that lets you begin the boss fight. If you do this, Sherma can be seen singing and clapping his chime to the Bell Beast. Interacting with Sherma here actually gives way to more dialogue that tries to point you in the way of the Silk Spear. Sherma asks if Hornet knows any particular type of song that would help the Bell Beast's uncomfortable situation, and Hornet responds by saying, "That's not the kind of gas we need, brother. Those roots gonna need something a bit more physical, a bit more hands-on, if you will." Sherma will then move on to Pilgrim's Rest in front of a weary pilgrim NPC, and despite being very easy to miss, this is actually one of my favorite interactions of his because you can tell he's trying so hard to uplift as many spirits as he possibly can. And this pilgrim has just, I don't know what this dude's went through, but he has had enough of his shit. Thing is, he only appears here if you found the Drifter's Cloak, but haven't yet continued upwards into Greymore. So, I mean, I guess it's not exactly hard to miss, like hard might be the wrong word, but the window of time in which this interaction remains open is extremely small, and any significant headway towards the main objective from this point just kind of makes him disappear, and I think that's kind of lame. There's also another condition that controls whether or not he disappears from here, which is the releasing of the Rhinogrunt, which I happen to find very funny because I don't think a single player managed to find the path up to the Rhinogrunt on their very first playthrough, and somehow managed to clear that bit of platforming prior to ever entering Greymore. Like, that just didn't happen. But like, I'm just gonna be honest, like this condition being here makes more sense than it not being here, because like, you see a rhinoceros sprinting towards you at full speed, I would run. I would absolutely run. I can't speak for my own audience, but that is absolutely a decision that I would have made. Maybe he could have brought it up later on in Songclave or something. Like, hey, Dick Thistle, you know that gate you unlocked back in Pilgrim's Rest? Yeah, there was a rhino behind that shit, asshole. I don't know, they had some room to play around with this, that's all I'm saying. Defeating Widow and resting at a bench in the now liberated Bellheart will have Sherma appear next to Bellheart's Bellway if you return to the city without starting Act 2. That one's fairly straightforward, I think a lot of people found that one. But this is where the game really starts psychoanalyzing its players a bit because so many different conditions are set in place for this next location, which is having Sherma appear in the Blasted Steppes, right at the Bellway station before the fight with Last Judge. At the time of finding this interaction, I think I still had 600 combined total hours in this game, and this was news to me nonetheless. I did not know this was here. But little did I know, it would be this very interaction you have with Sherma at the Blasted Steppes that would give me the final push to throw caution to the wind, table all my Excel sheets and various lists, and start pounding out paragraphs of material until I developed a master's thesis on why you either don't appreciate him or you don't appreciate him enough. See, when you look at each condition separately, it starts to sound very confusing, but as long as one of these are activated on your way up to the top, prior to triggering Act 2, then Sherma will appear in his designated location in the Blasted Steppes. The first two conditions make the most sense, fighting Last Judge and vanquishing the Great Conch Flies, both being conditions that allow him to appear, but the last two conditions involve resting at a bench in Sinner's Road or Bilewater. And although they sound out of place, I kinda have to assume this is just the game's answer to the player attempting the Sinner's Path up to the fight with Phantom and just going, fuck that, before retreating back to the pilgrimage route and to the Blasted Steppes once again. This has to be why these last two conditions are here. I cannot think of any other reason. At said location, we find him dozing off in the middle of the Blasted Steppes of all regions. Jesus Christ, this man could sleep through ground zero of an atom bomb and then wake up like, oh, that was a good ass dream I was having, you bitch. How you want? And it's this interaction when Sherma's blissful ignorance takes center stage, because if you haven't paid rosaries to sit on a bench at any point up until this interaction, the game takes time to explain to you the purpose of these structures through a dialogue exchange where Hornet tells Sherma you get the bench to appear by dropping rosaries into the shrine. You want to know how Sherma thought they worked? You just sing to it. you just sing to the shrine and the bench just spawn. What I have to assume is that he saw a sign with a bench on it pointing to one of these shrines, because the only other way he would know what's under these things would be if he successfully activated one by singing to it. I left this interaction ready to see Sherma develop superpowers in the second act. His next interaction is at the Grand Gate, which can be triggered once the last judge has been defeated, leading to the opening of the Grand Gate, and you've made it far enough in Act 2 to find Lace, but not far enough where you've defeated Cogwork Dancers or acquired Clawline. This is another incredibly easy interaction to miss, because if you're taking the pilgrimage route into the Citadel by defeating the last judge, you'll have started Act 2 in the Underworks, and will then have to climb up to where you meet Lace towards the center-ish of the Coral Chambers, like it's this room right here. And backtracking from here all the way to the Grand Gate is, it's not like it's time consuming or anything, but it almost definitely won't be the first thing on your mind heading into the second act. And you'll also need to make sure you rest at a bench on the way there as well, because resting at a bench after all the aforementioned conditions have been met is also part of what allows Sherma to appear in this location. So if you do all this shit and then hightail it back to the Grand Gate without sitting on a bench, you're not gonna see him. So make sure you sit on a bench. The dialogue itself is kind of just, I don't know, it's cute. Like, you do all this heavy lifting for Sherma to be able to cross over to the gate, and he just insists on thinking it's his unwavering faith that's privileged him with the sight as marvelous as the Citadel. Like, no, you triangle playing bastard, you didn't see the giant lady with the cistern guarding the bridge on the way over here? No, I know you didn't. That's because I kicked the shit out of her. If any other NPC were to say this to me, I would probably just dismiss it as annoying and self-centered and bad character, bad. But Sherma tosses that shit out so elegantly and with such innocent ignorance that the annoyance loops all the way back around to being charming again. And I just want to scoop him up like an old grandma saying hi to her kids and tell him what a great job he did getting past that scary ass bridge with nothing on it. Sherma only has one other location sandwiched in between the Grand Gate and his final destination in Songclave, which is the Citadel Spa. If he's moved on from the Grand Gate but you haven't yet completed at least 2 wishes of the Songclave wish wall, and building up Songclave isn't one of them, then you'll just find him in the spa instead. I don't know what sincerely traumatized part of me wanted Sherma's hat to have the same rules as Kevin from SpongeBob, but seeing him splash around in the water with his hat off was a mild jump scare. I remember an earlier playthrough I had when I was just like, I was in the spa because I looked up how to do the Green Prince quest, and I didn't know this was one of Sherma's locations and found this half-peeled onion floating in the tub. Like, dead-ass master of disguise this man is without his hat. But honestly, thinking about it now, a spa really would be like his perfect location. He probably got here skipping as merrily as he could with half the Citadel chasing him down without even knowing it. Like, this man's life has been a goddamn Looney Tunes episode up to this point, and I hope you're ready, because the second half of this quest line turns it into a generational hero's tale. This is where a shift begins to happen, because meeting Sherma in Songclave is where you start to notice his character arc move forward a bit. If you've been to Whiteward previously, you'll find a wish titled Balm for the Wounded stapled to the wish wall with Sherma's goofy little signature on it like a child's painting on a fridge. We don't see that. I'm just assuming that's what it would have looked like. Like, he can barely reach the damn thing. He was probably just stressed out writing it. Sherma travels to Whiteward in search of healing supplies for the rest of Songclave. This is the shift. Talking to Sherma when you first find him in Songclave, it's now evident that the gravity of Pharloom's situation is slowly creeping into Sherma's scope of awareness. And even as resplendent and vast as the Citadel remains, Sherma is forced to acknowledge the silence in the halls of the chambers and the suffering of his fellow pilgrims on the same path as he. Why would this paradise allow such terror and pain into its gilded walls? And upon this realization, Sherma's response is not one of dread and helplessness, but one of action for the pilgrims who were less fortunate. Although he doesn't explicitly say this, he doesn't need to say it, because we see it. We needn't look any further than the side quest on the wish wall with his signature, willing to journey into the haunted threads of the Citadel's operating theater despite knowing the dangers lying in wait. This is where he becomes trapped in the crannies of Whiteward and must be rescued by Hornet, resulting in the freest spool fragment you can think of next to just outright finding one in the wilderness before Sherma makes his way back to Songclave. When I did my quest ranking video, I think I put this quest either just shy of top 10 or right at the bottom of it. And I can't remember exactly where it was, just off rip, but I know it was somewhere around there. It may not have had the upfront, easily appreciable beauty of wishes like Trail's End, and I still think placing it anywhere above Silken Soul, the literal gateway to the hidden third act of the game, is a non-refundable one-way ticket straight to Doofusburg. But this was a comment that stood out to me and actually got me to rethink my position on it. It's honestly honestly a pretty innocuously worded quest, and then you're just jump scared by Whiteward, and you're like, oh fuck, like what's he going there for? The mental image of Sherma just giving his overalls a tug and marching it straight down to Whiteward does seem incredibly out of character at a first glance, but I think this is actually Sherma's first decision that isn't made on the foundation of ignorant optimism. Through dialogue with Hornet upon entering Songclave, it's made clear that Sherma almost immediately notices the haunting in the Citadel. Like, this place, it kinda sucks ass. It's literally the first thing he brings up. Like a little kid's first trip to Disneyland before that excitement gets tempered by the evil of waiting in lines. And like, if he's smart enough to make that observation despite his previous optimism, he is absolutely smart enough to arrive to the conclusion that an abandoned hospital during this haunting won't be the safest journey. So like, where does this decision come from? Or more specifically, what motivates him to be the tip of the spear on this expedition? Sherma doesn't have to go it alone, and the wish on the wall is purposefully worded like an open invitation, so he knows there are other pilgrims able to make the journey. So why does he do this? Well, I can't think of anyone more suited to give that explanation than Resident Evil Requiem's Miss Grace Ashcroft. Okay, don't leave. You need to just trust me on this. I need like 5 minutes. I think the most honest way to display the emotion of bravery is through characters who consistently head into these situations of imminent danger at their own expense to help those in need. Because choices like this are never made with the confidence of a WWE superstar, like you're this ironclad knight saving a princess from a dragon or deciding to hit public on a YouTube video. Bravery is often a very messy and very unsavory emotion in the moment, and watching characters commit to various, often incredibly confused actions that have a high odds of just landing themselves in a more stressful spot than they were to begin with, I think is a flawless representation of what real bravery is. Now, Capcom obviously has the additional budget and resources to communicate most of this emotion through the performance of a genuinely legendary voice actor. In addition to just having an exemplary across-the-board performance, this is also the chief device in which Grace is made very timid and very vulnerable. And I don't want to single out the voice acting for being the only contributor to this, but I mean, on the surface, it's honestly kinda hard not to.
Mom, I'm scared. No.
During Alyssa's death scene at the beginning of the game, like, I swear to Christ, the breakdown that follows, the voice acting sells it so incredibly well that Capcom could have brought her actual mother into the studio mid-take and just blew her shit smooth off. But falling too in love with Grace's voice acting also means falling in love with resources Team Cherry didn't have access to, or at least not, like, equally. Like, I get the first game made its money back a fuckatillion fold, but finding voice actors of this quality is not only very hard and very expensive, but it kinda just wouldn't really fit the vibe of Silksong to begin with. Finding these connections between characters like Grace and Sherma, I owe very little to high-budget voice acting, or even dialogue in general, but instead the choices each character makes and the situations they find themselves in. When Grace makes the irreversible decision of heading underground beneath the hospital to retrieve Emily, every living cell in her being is pushing her back from making that choice, and she does the bravest thing she possibly can in that moment, which is to tell every single one of those cells in her body to shut the hell up and that we're doing this because that's how willing she is to dedicate herself to her responsibility for Emily. Grace has a lot of little moments like this during her gameplay in Requiem, and on the surface, I think it's easy for Grace to come across as some whiny, uninspiring brat who just took a wrong turn and just wound up in a Resident Evil game. Like, even Ethan, as clueless as he was in 7, still finds opportunities to throw out cheesy one-liners like the script was co-opted mid-development by James Gunn or some shit, a character feature that only gets more prominent in Village to such an absurd extent that it's honestly a problem. But Grace? Grace is as green as the horn could ever get, son. She's dainty and fragile like a Honda Civic, but she handles like a Freightliner with 5 flat tires. This is the most helpless I've ever felt playing as a character from this franchise. And this is something the game is not only fully aware of, but even uses as a diving board to set up one of Requiem's most cathartic gameplay sequences during the player's control of Leon. You spend several tense and meticulous hours navigating the hospital hallways as Grace before you're hard pivoted into the driver's seat of a character with enough attrition and firepower to pick the entire facility clean in less than 10 minutes. An extremely therapeutic sequence that I don't think would have had nearly the same impact had Grace's frailty not been represented how it was. There's one really exhausting gameplay sequence where I'm sick, I know, fucking whatever, who gives a shit. There's this cutscene. It was a cutscene that I really wanted to talk about, and I forgot to write it in, so that's what I'm doing now. There's this dumbass gameplay sequence you play through as Grace, and it's annoying as fuck, where one of the puzzle boxes is padlocked, so Grace has to search for this bottle of corrosive acid to melt the lock on one of the 3 puzzle boxes in the hospital. And if you're playing this part as Grace, getting to this bottle is like a good fucking luck. Like, God's strongest armada of soldiers are guarding this thing. You can revisit this part of the game as Leon and just clear out the room in like 15 seconds. I think that's what most people do. Leon can't interact with the corrosive as an item, but if you do this and return to this part of the hospital again as Grace, everything will be dead. However, if you thug it out as Grace, you play the room patiently, and just get the corrosive bottle early, returning to the puzzle box triggers a cutscene. Grace is intercepted by Victor, exposition happens, and then Grace decides it's time to get the hell out of there. And in doing so, she bars the office door with a chair and temporarily traps Victor inside the room. And this buys her just enough time to open the door to the main hallway. But instead of exiting, she retreats back to a corner of the room out of view, hiding herself behind a dresser right as Victor busts out of the office. The door to the main hallway is left open, in hopes that Victor will take the bait, which he does. Grace! It's a very unexpected, very impressive display of territorial awareness that I would have loved to see more of during Grace's gameplay. This is a Resident Evil game with Resident Evil rules. So generally, whoever rolls up to the function with the most firepower and or thickest muscles is considered like the person to beat. And a character with the capability to leverage a perceived lack of attrition against her aggressors doesn't have to play by these rules. But that's also like the thing, like this lack of attrition isn't perceived, it is real. It's a setback Grace has no choice but to deal with. I think that's why I enjoy this cutscene so much. It doesn't feel like she devised a perfectly calculated master plan with a guaranteed end result. It feels like a Hail Mary, a desperate improvisation through a fleeting window of escape that she was just barely thinking straight enough to capitalize on. She stutters a lot, she fumbles basic social interactions, she knocks shit over, she can't sprint more than a couple seconds at a time without tripping over her own goddamn feet. And if mocap was a relevant resource in Silksong's development, I could very easily see a character like Sherma blundering his way through Whiteward exhibiting the same or very similar behaviors. Sherma is not Hornet in the same way that Grace is not Leon. Yet regardless of how ill-equipped they are to handle what may lie in wait, their position on the front lines remains a selfless act of conscious volition. They know the stakes, they look at themselves in the mirror and they're like, listen brother, this shit is bigger than you. And then make the choice to move forward despite their fear. And that is what real bravery looks like, you fucking bag of crushed water bottles. Bravery is not aura. It is, in fact, the absence of it. Fear and bravery are not opposites. Fear is a prerequisite to bravery. It's not enough to just be like, hell nah, I ain't afraid of shit. Well, guess what then? If you ain't afraid, then you ain't brave, bitch. Video games taught me that shit. Fuck you, Professor Blakely. You ain't no shit about being human. Weakened and confused, Hornet is welcomed back into consciousness by an unfortunately very familiar threat. As you stand up, you are immediately given one single objective: discover the fate of Pharloom. Mirroring the sequence of events in Act 1, Hornet completely expends her energy to the point of collapse, but is rescued by a familiar ally. As Act 3 begins and the kingdom becomes assailed with black-threaded creatures, the original caretaker wants no part of his due consequences, and retreats into Bonebottom's chapel ruins with as little indication as possible. Keeping steady with the discussion of bravery, very few are the instances where the game gives us a more perfect example of the antithesis. It is a shameful deficiency of courage that is immediately called out by Hornet at the very beginning of when she next speaks to the shamans. I know Sherma does technically say the original caretaker appointed him to be in charge of things, but that doesn't feel like an official or formal relinquishing of the responsibility of caretaker was ever actually passed to Sherma. It has a very you're in charge while I'm gone for the rest of time kind of vibe. The caretaker was in such a hurry that he decided to ditch his clothes in the heat of the moment and freeball it across the entire kingdom all the way to the chapel. A hilariously long distance to travel without clothes, yet somehow none of what I'm saying is a joke. I don't think the panic with which the caretaker left for Bone Bottom leaves any room for a conversation like this to have happened, at least not with the sincerity it probably should have been handled with. And if Sherma's character is to stay consistent with what we've discussed up to this point, it's extremely likely that Sherma probably just didn't even need this conversation to happen anyways. He was motivated enough by the unfurling chaos to step up to the plate and just kind of take charge. Assuming the effective role of Songclave's caretaker doesn't come with too many obvious changes in gameplay, you do hand supplies over to Sherma now instead of the original caretaker if you run a delivery mission to Songclave in Act 3. That much is both very true and very cool, but I think there's another change that's way more important that absolutely no one brings up or even knows it's there. A change that's so tucked away in the folds of the game that it feels almost subliminal, which are these careful, silent changes made to the dynamic between Hornet and Sherma. Almost every previous interaction we've had with Sherma becomes this cute little moment of growth where he learns just a bit more about the kingdom and the pilgrimage in which he's participating. Almost every time we talk to Sherma, we are directly placed in the role of teacher and mentor. But the conversation with him in Songclave at the start of Act 3 silently switches Hornet to a more confused and inquisitive position, while Sherma speaks with much more dignity and authority than he did prior. This exchange carries a vastly different tempo, and the polarities between these two characters are different enough for Hornet to end the exchange by thanking him, pleading that he will stay safe and take care of his fellow pilgrims, an overt and respectful acknowledgement of his new level of responsibility. Our first words to this NPC was a comment about how a locked gate might not be the best choice of audience for a musical performance. Like, what, dick? Like, think about how condescending this reads now by comparison. The way Sherma refers to the people of Songclave as us when recounting to Hornet how she was rescued by pilgrims who were fleeing back to Songclave tinges his words with a newfound air of not even courage, but simply dedication to the safety of his tribe. He speaks with the cadence of a leader with a leader's instinct while retaining the same optimism that carried him through some of the toughest parts of his own pilgrimage. But it's not really like a retaining of it as much as it is a reformation of it. The type of optimism Sherma carried with him during his pilgrimage to the Citadel was enforced by ignorance and honestly just like foolishness. It was built as a juvenile emotion with an ill foundation that was destined not to last, but we can tell through his actions just how important this optimism is to Sherma. And when that foundation was challenged, he just built a new one. He built a stronger one, and that's precisely what makes his later optimism so admirable. He's meant to be more than just an example of a brave leader in tumultuous circumstances. He's meant to be a blueprint on how to rebuild your spirit. And maybe that's why even in the possibility of total collapse, he still remains hopeful. Once you've rebuilt yourself, helping others do the same just becomes natural.